for painter in Paris, and he was the first prize, so he was a well-known painter. And he liked paint history, so he has many historical paintings.
And then tell them about your schooling as a young child.
Oh yes, and so I went to school for 12 years in a convent, and we learned to read and write in first grade in 3 languages, in Hungarian, German, and French. And in those days they had Gothic writing. The Germans had old-fashioned writing, so it was different from today. So that's how I was raised. And later, in higher grade, they added English. And so I'm so glad I learned English, because that's how I got to know my husband.
Why don't you tell them a little bit about what age you were when World War II, well, actually, what age were you when the Germans invaded Hungary?
You see, I'll show you what the problem was. You see, the Germany had a man named Hitler. Did you ever hear the name? So he was in charge, and at first he started very well. Everybody had a house and a car, and they made the roads, so they had very good news about Germany. But then he decided to conquer all Europe, and that's when the problem started. What they did is they invaded my country secretly at night, and they went to see our regent, and they told him if he doesn't cooperate, they are going to kill his son. So of course Hungary cooperated with the Germans, and the Germans came in, and their purpose was to conquer all the lands. They invaded France, they invaded Poland, they invaded all these lands, Latvia, Estonia, and then they started to fight against the Russians. And so that's when it was very difficult for Hungary, but we had to cooperate with them. So we were fighting with the Germans against the Russians. The Russians were, of course, fighting back, and they were wanting to conquer Hungary. That's when I was a teenager.
For a brief time while the Germans invaded Hungary, some of your family felt differently than you did about that. Why don't you tell them a little bit about what happened with your dad?
Well, my father, of course, my father had worked in Germany and liked it very much. And the Germans were always our friends. So my father was a Nazi. He was glad for the Germans to come in and for the Hungarians to fight with and we were against the Russians, because the Russians were communists, very cruel communists, and so the Hungarians were scared of them. That my father was happy to fight against them, and I had 3 brothers, and he wanted 2 of my brothers to be also against the Russians.
And can you tell them what you thought about it when the Germans took over Hungary, and what happened with the Jewish Hungarians?
Yes. That was the time, you see, Hitler was against the Jews. Before Hitler became the chancellor, in every school they had a crucifix with the Lord Jesus on it, because it was a Christian country. He made them take down all the crucifixes and put his picture up there. That's what happened. And all the people had to bow to Hitler. If they didn't, they got in trouble. So the young people became Hitlerjugend, young people for Hitler. And of course they didn't know very much better. That's what they heard, so that's what they did.
They weren't allowed to make choices for themselves or think about it?
That's right. It was forced. If they didn't, they got in trouble. And what's interesting, that I was married to an American, and my sister got married to a German soldier. And this German soldier was a Christian, and he prayed, asked God he would never have to kill anyone. And he never had to kill anyone in the war.
So
we were best friends.
What about so then the Germans took over and it was difficult, but what about when the Russians took over? So what happened? What was your perspective the night that the Russians started to invade Hungary?
But the first surprise we had, that the Americans were fighting against the Russians. And the Americans were fighting against the Germans, and when the Germans invaded Hungary, America started to drop bombs. We had a complete surprise. In Budapest, we thought that we will never be touched with the war. And one night, all of us, the city was all lit up, and we were having a good time. And all of a sudden, the bombs started to drop. And this lady's father-in-law was in one of those airplanes. I have found out later. Can you imagine?
My other grandfather,
And
my mother's. This is my father's mother, but
Yes.
my mother's father was bombing when my grandmother was
can you
trying to
imagine?
escape.
What a mess, what a mess.
You know what? I have a question. Is that okay if I interject here? Because I'm a little confused. Of course, we were allies with England.
Yes, the reason we were in the war to protect England from the Germans.
Right. And,
Yes.
well, no, well, yeah, for sure, but Pearl Harbor didn't hurt us. I mean, as far as getting them. What I mean is, that was our motivator.
problem,
Unfortunately, it takes it to happen on our soil, right?
Yes.
But the question I have, weren't the Soviets allies with America?
They were. They
Okay,
were.
but at one, we read in something that Strider, are you having the same question, Strider? That Hungary tried to invade Russia?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the
So we thought that that was because they were allies with Hitler. Were they allies with Hitler?
The Hungarians were allies with,
With
Hitler.
Hitler. Oh,
That's
they were.
right.
Okay.
It's correct.
Okay.
For a
My
very
father was
short
a
time.
leader among them.
Remember, they
Okay.
were coerced.
Yes.
Now,
Right.
oh, that's another question that you may want to answer right now. What is a regent? You said that the Hungarian regent
Because
was forced
in
by the
those days,
Germans.
We usually were a kingdom, but we didn't have a king. I'm not sure why. But anyways, we had a regent instead of a king.
Okay.
And he was in charge of Hungary.
Okay, so back to when the Russians invaded. Tell us about the night that the Russians invaded Hungary, and then you were, what age were you, and what were your thoughts at that time?
Yes, well, first I have to tell you about when those Americans came in to drop bombs. They dropped one bomb very close to us, and they shot down one plane. An American pilot dropped down right in front of our house from that plane. And the Hungarians were just mad at the war, so they all ran out of the houses from all around us with brooms and sticks, and they were going to hit the pilot. But my father ran out. He said, "That's not right, because in the war the civilians don't get involved in the war." So he didn't allow them to, and so an official car came and took him away. But that's the first American I ever saw.
What about when you fled? You were fleeing Hungary.
So then that's what was happening. The Russians were advancing all around here, and they were advancing into Hungary, invading Hungary. And it's terrible what they did. They were hanging people. They were carrying people away to Siberia. One of my girlfriends was taken away to Siberia. And so they did terrible things, so we wanted to flee. And it so happened that I had a brother who was working in Germany, so my mother and I got permission. We just got a piece of paper because my father was able to help. And we fled to go to Germany, to Munich.
And Germany was friendly to you because you had a Nazi father,
That's
even
right.
if though you
And
might
I
not
got
have been
permission
Nazi.
to come from a Nazi, so I was welcome in Germany.
Okay, so let's move forward a little bit in the war. So now you're in Germany. This is a very short time period, by the way. You're in Germany, but you're a refugee now. You don't have a job.
So,
You're 20 years old.
yes, I was already 20 years old. I had a good job in Hungary, but I had to give it up. And so my mother and I fled from Hungary to Germany to be with my brother. And at first it was terrible. There were the Americans were dropping bombs on Germany, and we were not there, and the bombs were falling on us. It was terrible. My brother lived in a very large 4-story apartment building. And when we arrived, half of the building was already bombed down. It was in rubble. The other half stood, but there was a bomb, and a bomb that hadn't exploded in the entrance. It had a big entrance, and we had to walk around that bomb to get into the building.
Oh my
So
goodness.
that was the welcome in Germany.
Oh, you're welcome. And it was hard to live as a refugee while you were in Germany?
Yes, we did. We were always hungry. We were always cold. It was 1944 winter, and we were always hungry. We were always cold.
But it wasn't too terribly long. It probably felt long at the time. But then you were a refugee about 6 months, is that correct?
It was almost every night. We had bombs day or night. We never knew when the bombs would fall. And one day the bombs were so close that all our windows got broken, so that we had to have put cardboard on our windows. It was always dark in the house. It was terrible. And we had to run down the cellar whenever the bombs were falling, and we were not allowed to talk so that we don't use up the air. So we had in complete silence, wait, and we heard the boom, boom, and the houses falling down. It was terrible.
But then the Americans invaded Germany. Tell us a little bit about what were your impressions when the Americans arrived.
Well,
why don't you sit down, because I know you're getting tired.
It was wonderful with the German soldiers were already around our house. They were fighting against the Americans, and so, but we started to hear noises. We were told that the Americans are marching in. It was a long, long convoy of all sorts of army vehicles, and the first thing that we saw was an American soldier was in a jeep, and he was handing out candy bars. That's how the Americans came in, and they were clean and they were happy. They were waving to us. They came in as friends to rebuild Germany. The Russians came in to destroy us. The Americans were Christians. In those days, the children learned the Bible in school and they prayed in school. Those were different type of Americans. They were good Americans. And they came in to rebuild. They came to tell us that they are friends. But the American soldiers had very strict rules not to fraternize with the people, because we were still the enemy. So they were not allowed to talk or have anything to do
But
with
you
them.
did a little fraternizing.
Yeah, but in secret.
So how did you, an enemy, because really you were a Nazi's daughter,
Yes.
how did you end up working for an
I
American
don't
know,
because I spoke English. I knew English, so they gave me a job in the American military government.
So how did people end up getting jobs when the Americans invaded?
The first thing the Americans did is there were strong rules. Everybody had to stay at home, and everybody over 16 had to sign up to work. And they found out who we are, and they assigned us to work. The Russians came in to do a complete mess, to confuse the people's lives. The Americans came in to put order. Everybody had to sign up for work, and everybody had to obey the rules.
Okay, so you got a job as for what was he at the time? Was he a colonel yet, or was he?
No, he wasn't there yet. I was assigned to work for American military government.
Because you spoke English.
I had to keep the files, the letters in order.
Was that a good job?
Well, it was a very good job, but I did a lousy job. I didn't know enough English yet.
So then you met.
Language.
When did you meet Opa?
And then one day, our boss left. We had somebody was leaving the office, but we had to always work too late, because they didn't organize the work real well. So we got a new boss, and his name was Major Philip Steers, and he walked in to take over, to put things in order, and he did. So that